Welcome to the Gary Galiher Law Hour. Attorney Gary Galiher and his firm have represented thousands of Hawaii workers and families during more than 35 years' practice throughout the islands. Whether helping countless workers exposed to asbestos unknowingly in their jobs, filing suit against gas companies for unfair local pricing, or representing the state of Hawaii and winning a settlement against big tobacco, the Galiher Law Firm helps fight for consumer advocacy and fair play for the people of Hawaii. No kopono on your behalf. Now, Gary and his team are here to take the mystery out of what they do and answer your legal questions. So here's the host of our show, Mike Buck, and Hawaii attorney Gary Galiher.
Hey, hello, and welcome to the program. Gary Galiher is not going to be with us today. In spirit, he is, of course. And it's sort of interesting that today's program is going to be on a subject that I knew relatively nothing about a year ago when we first started talking about doing this show. I mean, I knew it existed, and you know it's existed. We're going to be talking about head injuries, primarily concussions and other things attached to that. And it may be, just so that you're going to learn a little something, you're going to have to find out if you've ever been hit hard enough to have a concussion, or if you have a concussion, what it can do later on, how things manifest later, all of this stuff, which probably would have been like teaching Greek to a fire hydrant a little while ago, but not anymore. Anthony Carr is here from the Galiher Law Firm. We got a very, very interesting expert with us as well, Tony. But first of all, welcome back. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Mike, for having me on again.
Always a pleasure. Now, I think when we first broached the subject of head injuries and concussions, pretty near a year ago, it was like we were, discovering the fountain of youth, or we're up there doing the walk across the Antarctic to forge a path. And now I think, for a number of reasons, primarily some celebrities that have been judged to be, impaired because of head injuries, and this blockbuster movie, Concussion. And you said off the air that a lot of people have said, wow, I had no idea.
No, it's been really encouraging to see a lot of the lay folks out there, the common people who might not have a depth of knowledge about these issues, now seeing it in popular culture. Now it rings true to them. Now it becomes a relevant issue.
I knew that in the very beginning when I asked you guys, okay, what are you in this for? And we learned from Gary at that time that there was a national movement, particularly at the higher end of sports like the NFL, to say, hey, wait a minute, there's some really bad stuff going on here. And I wondered where the Galiher Law Firm was going to be in that pecking order. And I realized it was just Gary trying to make an effort to stop this chain of events from happening at a young age. So we talked about kids got to be looked at.
The kids are definitely an area of focus for us, absolutely. We tend to get these cases in the context of litigation when the injuries have already happened. But there's so many opportunities out there to prevent them from happening in the first place, especially for children. So that's kind of that's one of our bigger priorities.
Do you think that maybe when you get to the upper end of professional sports like the NFL, that there's just so much money in it, you're expected to perform at such a level that because of bonuses and incentives, you're likely to carry on with ongoing hurt that you don't tell anybody about just because you don't want to lose the money?
Oh, absolutely. Money's a part of it, the warrior mentality that you can find in sports like that. That's why it's especially important, I think, to reach the kids at a young age. They can develop the right habits before it becomes too late.
Okay, so when we get into the gist of our program today and talk about this conference that was recently done and how it sort of contributes to the pebble in the pond theory of more knowledge. Let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons that got Gary first and then all of you interested in this. And I know part of that was because of the affinity you have of the daughter of the late John Wilbur, who was a professional football player for many years, a coach, a trainer, a rugby player, and everything else. How much of that do you now see as being, wow, I'm starting to get it now. I'm starting to get what this guy went through.
Oh, John Wilbur was the driving force behind a lot of what we're doing, a lot of what we've learned. Without his tragedy, unfortunately, a lot of our involvement probably wouldn't quite be at the level that it's at.
Okay, let's talk about this. Recently, there was a study, a conference about the long-term effects of concussion and repetitive concussions after that, and all kinds of trauma. I guess a few years ago, it would have been pretty difficult to fill up a hallway or fill up a room with people interested in this. But now it's like piques the interest. Tell us a little bit about what this conference was. I know that the Galiher Foundation was a driving sponsor of this thing. And tell me who got gathered around. And more importantly, let's introduce our special guest to the program.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I'd like to take your invitation there and invite Dr. Horvath, who we have the pleasure of joining us here today. the director of Pacific Disabilities Center, involved in some great research with the University of Hawaii, and I'll let her speak more to that. But we're honored to have Dr. Horvath here with us.
Yeah, and first of all, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
I like to ask this of all of our experts, and particularly our PhDs. What was the compelling reason that you decided to study in this area? Was it family? Was it friends? Was it personal experience? What?
Well, I have my degrees in social work, and so part of what compelled me was I came, unfortunately, from a family of addicts. My mother was addicted to gambling, and my father had problems with it. My sister has issues with drugs. So I wanted to help others so that I have this unique perspective. So I wanted to use that to help others.
In some respects?
In some way. But I was also looking for answers for myself, too.
Sure.
I'll be honest about that.
I think, though, that the neat thing about this is that what you're talking about, that when you start looking at behavior and you think, why is this guy or why is this gal, why are they so mean or why are they so inconsiderate or so aloof? And you think it's a personality thing, and now we're finding out that a lot of it may be physical.
Absolutely. So you've been talking about concussions, and you mentioned CTE, so chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Let's call it CTE.
Let's call it CTE. We decided on that one. It's just easier.
Yeah.
That could very well explain some of this behavior, the shortness, the short fuse, the irritation, the snapping at other people, the anger at self and others. All of these things could be explained by CTE, by the effects of these concussions. And the conference, I have to say, was excellent. I went last year also, which was the first year for the Neuro-Huddle, and this year they were able to get a lot more speakers.
Neuro-Huddle, because we're talking football, and that's kind of a common expression, right?
And so they had a lot more speakers this year, and they were just excellent. And it was clear, although we learned a tremendous amount at this conference, that what we don't know far exceeds what we do know.
Wow. That's a big...
It's absolutely clear.
Anthony, in some respects, everybody knows that the Galiher firm is a firm that looks after people that have been hurt, injured, and killed. And I know that we live in an instant gratification society. So somebody wants to say, oh, good. Now we get all these experts. They can diagnose what I got and give me a pill. Isn't it really tragic that there really probably aren't too many pills? There are medicines that can do some things, but isn't it true, or what we're finding out, of a lot of these people that are either potentially clients or patients are really damaged? I mean, not just little kind, big kind.
No, it's absolutely true. That's why the research that Dr. Horvath and others are doing is so important, because we have so much that we have to figure out, and we don't have that miracle pill yet. And whether we will at some point is speculative, but in the meantime, we have a lot to learn. Dr.
Horvath, in that this is what you say, sometimes mood and short temper driven. I know everybody wants to fix it. Everybody wants mom or dad to be okay. I guess down the road, the more of these conferences and the more experimentation and development and identification of the concern is going to give those that can develop medication or pills sort of a lot of help. What are we looking for? What are we looking for as far as input and information?
Well, right now, the only way to confirm the diagnosis is through autopsy after death. There's no way to tell for sure while someone is living if they do have this or not. We can have suspicions about it. And one of the speakers at the conference was talking about that he hopes in the next few years we'll actually be able to have a diagnosis while someone is still alive.
Yeah, I must tell you, when you first started talking and telling me, I thought, well, that's good. Maybe I can get an examination to find out if anything's going on. I don't want to know after I'm dead that I had a concussion that was causing me to be a little weird. So obviously we want to try and push this calendar up a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so he's hopeful that they will have a diagnosis in just a few years when someone's living, we'll be able to tell. And if we have a better understanding of that, as he was saying, then we can better start to think about treatments. So that's what they're really aiming for and pushing. And he's just gotten a multi-million-dollar grant to help do that.
And I want to ask about that, because I think that's significant, because what we already know now, there's trainers, there's coaches, there's attorneys, there's attorney staffs. There's a lot of people that want a paradigm shift in the way we teach, coach, and use our kids, and reward statistics. Nice tackle. I'm glad, and you go knock the guy out of the game. We don't want to do that anymore.
And you were talking earlier with Tony about how the NFL players may be prodded on by money and need to perform. Well, think about the kids too. They may not want to report their symptoms because maybe they don't want to disappoint their parents,
of course,
or
big
their
pressure.
coach,
Yeah.
and so they just hide their symptoms. No, I'm just feeling fine. I'm not dizzy. I don't have double vision. I'm perfectly fine.
I learned a little bit, Tony, about some of the things that Gary was concerned about, and that is, in this day of technology, isn't there a way that we can transmit to the sideline when somebody gets hurt and say, oh, that guy just got his bell rung. Get him out. He's showing a 9 on the scale right here. We need to do this.
Well, Dr. Swartz from the University of New Hampshire was one of our presenters, and he's doing some incredible work with accelerometers on helmets to determine, in his context, it's how certain tackling techniques are reducing impacts. But that's absolutely the case.
But, that it also shouts to, all right, when we convene, who are the stakeholders? And I'm so impressed. Dr. Horvath, I want to go back to you because obviously if you get a bunch of highbrows making a bunch of big-time decisions in a private little room, that's one thing. But this seems to be more encompassing with trainers and coaches and parents and students, everybody.
Absolutely. And we have a wonderful program, the Hawaii Concussion Awareness Management Program, that is statewide. In fact, some of the speakers at the conference were impressed by the fact that it's throughout the whole state and all the schools who go out and work with the coaches and the trainers to help identify concussions, what to do, return to play, and so on. So there's been a concerted effort here in Hawaii for many years to address that issue.
What is your specific interest in the outcome of some of the studies that get done? How would that help you in your area of expertise?
Well, we are actually contracted with the Department of Health from the same Neurotrauma Special Fund as the HCAMP program is to do a Hawaii Neurotrauma Registry project. And one of the biggest questions we always get is, what is neurotrauma? So that covers traumatic brain injury, stroke, and spinal cord injury. And this is a voluntary registry. And I have to give the Department of Health real props here because they're trying to be proactive. They're trying to gather information on people who've had these injuries across the lifespan so they can really better prepare in the future policies and services. So we got a bunch of data on once people are in the hospital or in rehab, once they go home, we got nothing.
You got nothing. I was looking at something the other day, knowing that we were going to do this program, and I think I got to ask this question. You mentioned earlier that, we talked earlier how a professional is reticent to show pain or problems because he doesn't want to get impacted. But what about all of these young people that have a role model that is a professional and their fathers are pushing them on the sidelines? Get in there. There's a scout here. You need to get the scholarships. Shake it off. Be stronger.
Absolutely. The parents play a tremendous role in this. And there are so many other things that kids can be doing instead of football or other contact sports. Soccer's another big one. There's a lot of head injuries and so on. Judo, even women's judo.
By the way, we had a wonderful time just before this on my regular program to do a couple of interviews and a couple of chats about this very thing. And I thought that, Anthony, that was really true because the stakeholders that are interested in this are so widespread that you just get this feeling like, boy, there's going to be a lot of progress made. Let's talk about not just that, but where you think the results of this conference are going to be with raising the bar for the next one to get more stakeholders, more players involved.
No, I think, Mike, our role in this is really, there's already so many incredible efforts already underway, nationally, locally. We're trying to find a way where we can kind of bring folks together who are on similar united missions. And I think we were in part able to accomplish that through last week's the conference, January 28th and 29th, bringing some of the top experts on these various issues. And
we had a trainer that we talked to, and it was really, when we were talking about the difference when we had Gary to do that, was to talk about, it's women's judo and is one of the biggest ways of concussion. And I asked, and maybe Dr. Horvath, you can shed some light on this, is there enough anatomical or physical difference in men and women that say women, particularly with regards to the head, might be more susceptible to that kind of injury?
That's what we learned from one of the speakers. I believe it was from Dr. Stern or one of the others at the excellent conference, was that anatomically neck-wise, women are different, and that could be part of the reason responsible that they get more concussions. And the other thing is too, and maybe you know this, but what we're starting to see is maybe it's not so much a concussion or one concussion, but it's a series of repetitious sub-concussive blows that may actually be worse than just having an outright concussion.
That's really compellingly interesting. I mean, we know about an earthquake is the big one, and then the aftershocks is so what? But in a tsunami, that can be way different. The little waves come at first, and then here comes the big one. So are you looking at being able to compile data so that you have cumulative evidence of maybe how long this person's been suffering this, and will it help in treatment?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of it, is we're collecting the data for DOH to look at policies and services, but there may be other things that we can glean from that, because they really are looking over the lifespan. And that's one of the things we need, as many people from throughout the state as possible in the registry, but we really need more neighbor island people, and we really need kids.
Okay, so this is the shout out to everybody out there, and I particularly want to talk to grandparents. Those of you that go and watch these games, I think, Tony, we've all been at a game, either a loved one or a friend or a child or grandchild is in, and when they get hit, we feel the pain. It's like, oh my, get him out of there. That's got to hurt. Isn't exactly that in some of the trainers like you talked about at H Camp? That's exactly what they're looking for.
And the important thing to note here is like Dr. Horvath was just talking about, is we haven't identified a threshold yet. So never mind concussions, but repetitive sub-concussive trauma, there has been no threshold identified where it's okay if you get one concussion, or it's okay if you play 20, sports for this long. You should have a special attention towards these types of issues. If you have even any type of concern, it's something that you should discuss.
It's sort of interesting. I like to sort of do these little analogies, and it just came to mind. Somebody that has a lot of stress in their life and they grind their teeth at night, in one night you don't damage your teeth, but in a couple of years they start falling out. So do we have things to learn along those lines with regards to this type of hit?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, they don't even know what's the worst thing. We tend to think about head-to-head butting, but it may be that the rotational, when you're like hit from the side and your head twists, that may actually be even worse than getting hit from head-on.
As we develop knowledge on this, would that then hopefully through, say, school administrators and everything else trickle down to the coaching and training staff to say, okay, we're not going to tackle this way anymore. We're going to tackle this way. We're going to change the sport. Is that what we need to do in some areas? Well,
that's what one of the experts, Dr. Swartz, was talking about. He's actually got a research project where, as part of the regular football practice, they take some time to tackle without not only helmets, but without any gear, any padding.
Yeah.
And they learn how to use their shoulders and hit at the midsection instead of using their heads against heads.
Yeah, I have to tell you, when we did a program before, Tony, you probably remember, and by the way, if you want to learn more about this, go to GaliherLaw.com, GALIHER Law.com, and you can click on this button. And we're going to give you, during this program, ways that you can respond and help in the compilation of research and data and statistics, because that's what Dr. Horvath is saying, and that's what we so desperately need, is to get this thing categorized. It's kind of, Tony, in a way, I want to liken this to the expertise that Gary and the team have in now representing a lot of cases on the mainland. Maybe Hawaii is really at the forefront of this because the weather's better, we do more collective things, a kid is likely to be involved in lots and lots of sports because we don't want him playing video games. So we've got a pretty good starting match for this stew here, don't we?
I think Hawaii is a great setting to help move all these issues forward. Like Dr. Horvath said, quite a few folks commented on not just what H Camp is doing, but how far afield Hawaii is. And I think part of it is, it's a smaller community. It's easier to make connections with school systems and the appropriate stakeholders.
Yeah.
And there's a concern for the well-being of our children and their future.
Every now and again, Dr. Horvath, you mentioned the neighbor islands a while ago. We have to circle back because I know there are people out there either listening over the radio live or online that are out there. And the biggest lure for any kid on the neighbor islands, male or female, boy or girl, is to get to a college where there's a scholarship. And we have a lot of talented, really great athletes on these neighbor islands. So I'm thinking that there is where we're going to start saving people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The more information, the better. Every little bit is going to help us to understand what's going on.
When you talk about your chosen field in social work, having this new almost arsenal of information that you can use, how helpful is it within in your profession to make sure that the practitioners know, hey, wait a minute, before we start doping this person with this thing, let's find out if there's something going on over here that we might be able to direct. In other words, I want to find out what we can do, how the program can help get some of the baseline information that you all are looking for.
Well, it actually fits perfectly with social work's view. We tend to view things very holistically, looking at the person in their environment. All of those things are important, so it really fits very well with it. But you're absolutely right. Bringing this knowledge to people, it is surprising how many professionals don't know about this.
I bet.
Better now that the movie's out. And
isn't it amazing? Well, this all of a sudden it was
just put Will Smith in there and you'll be fine.
And not only was it was a for-profit movie, but all of a sudden during the production of this, they realized what they were onto, and they got more and more specific. As a professional, did you agree with the information that they were disseminating through that movie?
I know some of it was little Hollywoodized.
Oh, gotta be, sure.
And if you've seen the excellent Frontline special, League of Denial, that's actually a great place to start. If you haven't seen the movie Concussion yet, or even if you have, go back online and look at Frontline's League of Denial.
League of Denial. Got to remember that. We'll tell you about that a little later on in the show. But what I'm still saying is that, and specifically to the neighbor islands, every kid on the neighbor island wants to fly away and go somewhere, go to school, do something.
Yes.
And with the high cost of that, of travel and of, just going to a school, they're going to use every option they have, whether it's filling out money for a grant or playing in a sport.
Absolutely. Yeah. But there are so many sports out there, too. It was interesting. One of the golf greats, Dottie Pepper, just wrote an article about this, talking about why not golf? Golf is a contact sport.
Believe it or not, especially
golf
if you get hit by a ball,
sport,
it's pretty
right?
contact. Yeah.
It's very athletic, so why not? And one of the physicians we work with, his nephew actually used to play football, no more because he's got concussions. He turned to golf. He's now a caddy at Pebble Beach, and he loves it. Absolutely loves it.
Yeah, I think that maybe sometimes, and this is why I know this comes up, because I think, Tony, that you in the elder abuse and everybody else is sort of specializing in different areas of law. But a lot of people right away are going to suspect, oh, these guys are attorneys. All they want to do is go sue somebody. Isn't it nice? We can talk about Gary because he's not here. Isn't it nice that he realized, look, I'm going to use my organization up to this level. Sure, we're going to go out and litigate for people that have been wronged or hurt or killed. But what we're going to be able to pass down or throw out the food chain is worth it.
Yeah, it's actually quite the opposite. I mean, these are cases that we've been litigating, different angles with sports becoming such a relevant issue. But whether it be in a car accident or however other incident, we've been litigating traumatic brain injury cases. So that's not new. What is new is us taking the opportunity to go beyond the context of litigation and to make contacts with people like Dr. Horvath, with organizations like HCAMP, so that these issues that we're addressing don't just get stuck in the context of litigation.
Yeah, but Dr. Horvath, maybe you can sort of when somebody's going to go to a conference or contribute information or be part of the statistics, you have your desire, right? I mean, you have your chosen field. I can use this. This is going to help me and do this. Isn't it amazing how many overlaps there are in interest in this area, and how many different practitioners can use it in so many different ways down the road?
Absolutely. At that conference, we were there from Hawaii Neurotrauma Registry Project and Pacific Disabilities Center, but you had coaches, you had trainers, you had pathologists, you had physicians, you had lay people there. You had a very broad audience. This touches everybody.
We need to find out about this database that you're working on. We need to find out about this registry, because there's a different. I went and took a look, and there's a wealth of information online, and we'll pass that out in a bit too. I think that there are some people that don't really realize how valuable their input or their kokua would be to this.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it would be tremendous. Yeah. It is tremendous. This is a voluntary database. And everything, I should mention, is kept confidential. It's only a handful of people who actually see any of the identifying information. The information that's presented to the public is aggregate, and it has no names, no contact information on it, but it will go so far in helping Hawaii better understand what they need to plan for the future.
Why are we so unique here, Dr. Horvath? Why is Hawaii a pretty good place to do this study and compile this data?
Actually, that is an excellent question. You know, we, as
I get
part
paid
of this,
medium bucks to ask.
You did. Well, we actually did a survey of all the states and territories last year, and we are unique.
Yeah.
We're the only ones who are doing this, trying to follow up with people this way, interviewing them and getting more detailed and rich information. Most every state, if they have a registry, they're just using like the ER information,
sure,
and that's it. And so again, they don't know what happens once the person goes home.
Yeah,
and we are unique in that way.
Or did they go to the ER after one hit, or did they have 30 that finally caught up with them on that day? You see, I'm also wondering if we can blow our own horn here for a minute with our ethnicity and with our different, because here in Hawaii, you might have on one football team 50 nationalities, and they're all doing the same thing. Does some get hurt less than others? Are there skulls a little harder in some people?
Or the necks, something in the necks too,
yeah.
if that's part of it. That could be, absolutely. Yeah. You're absolutely right. We are unique in very many ways, and there's a lot that we can contribute, not just to Hawaii, but possibly beyond also.
I need to know, when this got first put together, there were, Anthony, maybe you guys talked about this, not as far as what role Galiher Law was going to have in this, because I think what Galiher did in the way is because Gary stepped up and said, look, I want to fund this. I want to get this out there because obviously we're going to be able to use some of this information. But did you find out that there are more and more applications for this kind of a conference going into the future? It seems like, wow, there's a lot of stuff we can spread out of here.
Oh, no, we walked away with a ton of different ideas for moving forward in the future, whether it be more specialized presentations and conferences for different medical specialties, addressing the athletic trainers and the coaches more specifically in a narrow event. So we're walking away with this with a lot of ideas for opportunities on how to continue reaching the right folks.
I tell you, I feel like a kid in a candy store because there's just so many things that I want to know, and that's why I'm going to guess that when you talk about, once again, Dr. Horvath, because of your specialty, of the social work area, sometimes you hear, well, also a bad diet contributes to somebody's moodiness. If they're eating better, they'd be okay. Let's talk about that, because I'm sure that somewhere along the line, the three main food groups come up a lot in these sort of discussions. Is there anecdotal or other information to suggest that, realigning somebody's food consumption and or drink consumption or whatever can help in recovery socially?
There are some things out there that suggest that, but we don't have any hard evidence behind it. There is some anecdotal information, but as I mentioned earlier, there's so much. What we don't know far outweighs what we do know. And one of the other things I just wanted to mention that Tony reminded me of is with the kids. Some of the things that are being proposed are perhaps that no one under 12 be able to do any kind of contact sports, or at least in football. And honestly, 12 is kind of arbitrary. We don't know. Maybe it needs to be 9. Maybe higher is okay. Another one of the experts suggested that the key thing here is informed consent. And a 12-year-old or a 9-year-old can't really give informed consent to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to play football. It may damage me down the line, maybe, maybe not. But he was saying, really you need informed consent. And so until someone is old enough to actually understand and give their consent for themselves, maybe they shouldn't be playing.
Yeah, and that would put a whole different spin on recruiting and developing, because sometimes a coach likes to say, you know what, I got friends in the PAL league or in 9th grade football, and they can keep an eye out. When they see a kid that's got some skills, we can start working on that kid right away. one of the really neat things, Anthony, that we did before when we first started these discussions about HCAMP was how many trainers are working with coaches and how they seem to be willing to consider maybe practice days, like Dr. Horvath said, without shoulder pads or without helmets.
No, it's great to have those folks being able to integrate their knowledge, their lessons with the coach as well. And if there's the right fit, we've seen some incredible things take place with Eric Swartz in the University of New Hampshire. He was able to get the entire university football program on board with his tackling techniques to help reduce head impacts. And now that has turned into high school programs that he's doing throughout New Hampshire.
Yeah, and I know that there's some places where the light bulb's already gone off and everybody's getting aware of this. But I would certainly think, and maybe Dr. Horvath, you can help in this, that this kind of conference also tends to instill a little urgency. So, hey, now that we got this information, for heaven's sakes, let's get on it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we hope, that this will have helped light a fire under a lot of people. HCAMP has been doing great work getting the word out there, but there's definitely more that needs to be done in the schools, in the leagues outside of the schools, and so on, in terms of taking this seriously and moving.
I want to talk about how important this registry is. I think that what we're talking about here is this can be a whole folder full of information that any number one of these shareholders or stakeholders can use to help them in their field. And I think, once again, to get people involved in it, how can people find out more about that? And what sort of information are you really looking to compile?
We're looking, it can be anyone who's a resident of Hawaii who's had either the traumatic brain injury, stroke, or spinal cord injury. Doesn't matter what age. It doesn't matter where the injury happened or when, as long as they're a resident of Hawaii. And so we want to know the nature of those injuries. And, notice I say those injuries.
Yeah.
We are finding that of about almost half of who we have currently who've chosen to be in the registry have multiple neurotrauma injuries. Sometimes
not just
3, 4, or more.
From playing tennis, from playing football, for golf, for whatever, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But I think what's really important, though, is to make people understand how easy this might be. Has technology entered the picture where if somebody wants to be a part of this registry, it's a little more user-friendly than maybe it might have been?
Yes, we try to make it as easy as possible. They can go to our website, which is www.hntrsurvey.com.
hntrsurvey.com. Pretty easy.
And they can go ahead and take the survey there if they like. We ask questions about when the injury happened, the diagnosis, but especially the focus is on how they're feeling now, what are their needs now, how are they coping, and so on. And we're happy to go out and talk to their groups if they have groups. We're happy to do that. They can call us at 808-692-1375. And I need my glasses for the next one.
You're going to need to, sometime between now and the next 10 or 15 minutes, my tasking you out there listening is to get something to write something down with. Don't count on your memory, because if it's like mine, it'll go in one ear and out the other. So you got to figure this. Either enter it into your smartphone if you got a smartphone, or write this down, because I think that when people maybe click into this and find out where they are and maybe the different kinds of information you need, almost everybody can be a contributor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can administer the survey over the phone. Here on Oahu, we can meet them somewhere at their home or a safe location elsewhere and do the survey there. We can mail it to them. So we try to make it as easy as possible for people to participate.
Anthony, I know that it must be very difficult, because in a structured office like the Galiher Law Office, you guys have schedules and you have dates to meet and everything else. It seems that this is a lot more far-reaching in a positive way than a negative way. I mean, obviously there's lawsuits. There's going to be people that and their families that deserve to get compensated for loss and everything else. But it doesn't seem to be the driving factor. It seems to be one of the ancillary benefits is to identify and get somebody taken care of. But what about prevention?
Well, prevention is a huge thing, and one point to make that's important is that we've certainly identified there's some sort of latency period associated with these conditions, meaning that whatever ultimate symptoms you may develop, they don't just immediately occur. So it could be a matter of months, it could be a matter of years. So prevention might not just be that first impact. it could be the second or third or fourth one.
Yeah,
So
I
don't assume just because you haven't experienced symptoms that you're free and clear.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm so excited that this came up, and I know that Dr. Horvath's going to agree. Is that, you know, I remember one of our leading dermatologist friends that we talked to years ago said one sunburn can trigger a melanoma in 20 years. So it's not today that got hurt; it's yesterday that got hurt. But further to that, I think that because of the tremendous amount of success that Galiher Law has had in compilation of data and information, if you liken this to the amount of research that went into the asbestos litigation that Gary became so famous for, that's the template. That's okay. It's a different whole deal, but by golly, there's a lot of similarities here because the injury may manifest in a symptom way later.
Well, there are a lot of parallels between it. And one of them is that the defendants like to take advantage of a lack of information. So they'll say, well, there's no proof that just one single concussion can cause all this. So we're trying to get outside the context of litigation. And we're thinking, okay, well, if that's an argument that the defendants are going to use, let's think of how we can, reach the community with this type of information. And let's get folks erring on the side of caution.
Sure.
So if, in fact, as they would like to say that there is no proof that one can cause it, well, there's also no proof that isn't the case.
Well, that's why I'm thinking, Dr. Horvath, that this registry is going to be almost like biblical. I mean, in its value, because the compilation of this really would help somebody to find. Don't we all really want to know where we are on the food chain, or in chronologically? We're trying to figure things out. What if you can turn to this as a parent? And say, okay, before I sign off on letting my little Lucy or my little Sammy play football or judo, let's look at what could happen, and more importantly, where can they go where people know about this to make sure it doesn't happen to them or try not to happen to them.
Absolutely. The registry itself will be a wealth of information on that. But also, Mike, we have tremendous amount of handouts when we go out. We have tables at public events, and we do presentations geared toward the particular audience, whether it's to kids or a kupuna, to talk about how to prevent these injuries, what to do if you have been injured, and so on. So there's already a wealth of information, and but there's so much more that we need to know.
I was thinking of something kind of funny, because I go to a lot of events, we all do, and I would imagine that before, the tent that said, this is a brain injury tent, or this is the concussion tent, people would have just yawned and walked by. But now we have this great social media thing going on, and we certainly have the movie that we can sort of gauge this stuff around. And I know that it's something, Anthony, that we should make people aware that Gary and the Galiher, involvement in this goes way deeper than what one might think. In other words, you all know it's long term. This is long haul what we're talking about.
We've had it happen too often where we have clients who come in and then we're able to do our job as their lawyers in the context of litigation. And then we end up with a settlement after the end of civil litigation, but then they're still suffering symptoms, right? They haven't been made whole by the civil lawsuit, and so it's not in Gary's DNA, it's not in our firm's DNA to say, well, that's your problem. We've done our job here. That's not how we do business.
But if you do this, it's HNTRsurvey.com.
Yes.
I think that maybe people think, what I got is Manini. It's, it doesn't matter. It does matter. Aren't you guys like hungry birds in a nest? You're ready for just about everything somebody can tell you?
It does matter. Yeah. Every little bit of information does matter, because we have our suspicions based on the individuals we've worked with and the research that has taken place, but we need the numbers to show it. We need the people who say, yes, it is a financial issue. Employment is one of the big things that we hear about. It's extremely difficult, because can you imagine if you've had a traumatic brain injury and you don't know when you're going to suffer a migraine or have a really bad day and you can't keep your work schedule? Well, think about how that's going to be.
We're talking everyday folks now, not NFL
absolutely.
Stars or WNBA stars. We're talking about just people. But I still think that we need to make sure that moms and dads, coaches, trainers, ex-coaches. I know people that have left sports because they got concerned that their kids that they were coaching were getting hurt too much, and nobody was doing anything about it.
And we are seeing some of the NFL players start to say that, right? It's like, you know what? I've weighed the facts. I'm not going to take the risk. I'm done. I'm
Yeah,
done.
I actually know one parent. Anthony, you'll like this. This guy has a son who's 21 years old now, and he's really gifted. I mean, this guy, there's no sport he couldn't do, and he wants to play football. And his father said, no, you don't. You want to play baseball. And he says, well, baseball players get hurt just as much as football players. Isn't there some sort of a false understanding of what sports really hurt you and what sports don't?
I think there absolutely is. And I think if nothing else, what we've accomplished is the fact that we're actually having this discussion. I mean, I don't have, an official position. I'm not going to tell all the listeners out there, you absolutely have to make sure that your children stop playing football. That's not our message.
You know why that's counterproductive? Because the NFL is sponsoring things that there's 30 minutes of running around every video. But do you notice that all the spots that they do about that don't show any contact? They just talk about running up and down the field and throwing a ball, but not hitting each other. Maybe they're getting it.
Well, it's good in the commercials, but we still see at the youth level, they're still learning certain tackling techniques. I remember when I was in Pee Wee myself, they taught you how to tackle and how to lead with your helmet. And I'm sure that's still going on. And so the most important thing is that we're having the discussion, that this is things that people are thinking about and taking into account.
Well, just as Dr. Horvath, you were saying earlier that, you're at all of these events with the tents and the handouts. It must be intensely gratifying when somebody says, this is really good. What's coming up? Are there some public things coming up in a bit? I mean, first of all, coming off the heels of this very important and successful conference, we can gloat about that for a while, but let's talk about what's coming up.
Yeah, we have some things that we usually go to. There's like the Senior Life, Good Life Expo. We try to hit as many of the health fairs and the emergency preparedness fairs coming up this year. Mostly they haven't started planning yet, but they will be. The First Hawaiian Bank has their primetime wellness fairs. But again, we're trying to hit more where we're reaching out to kids and parents. And the interesting thing is, when we talk to the kids, they're ready to go.
Yeah,
it's the parents who are going, now, wait a minute, you want my kid to do what?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
It's very interesting, and we understand the issues around confidentiality. And we were talking earlier about how it could be that some parents may be in denial too. That that's not going to happen to my kid. Or they
my
may
kid's
not.
tough. He can make it.
Yeah.
Plus that he needs a scholarship.
They may not understand what possibly could happen to their child. And as you were pointing out earlier, they really need the information so they can make an informed choice.
Anthony, let's make sure people that we're not pulling any punches back here, that the actual effects of these cumulative hits can be terrible. And I know that some of the clients that you've dealt with and their families, you could anecdotally share a little bit that without being specific about some of the kind of things that happen and some of the lives that either get shortened, curtailed, or ended because of these injuries.
Mike, even if it's a mild traumatic brain injury, and first of all, that can be misleading. All that mild TBI means is that you usually didn't have
That's
a loss of
smaller
consciousness.
tsunami, right? I mean, it's a tsunami, still a tsunami.
Exactly. So the word mild can be misleading, but we've seen it manifest itself in a variety of different ways. A student who didn't even maybe suffer a loss of consciousness, but had such persistent symptoms of a lack of attention and focus that they couldn't finish their studies. Behavioral changes to the point where you're not even really the same person, who you used to be. And it can impact you in so many different ways, like we've talked about: employment, your ability to continue your studies, your social relationships with your loved ones.
You can imagine sitting across from a recruiter or a job interview and not being able to concentrate on what the guy's saying. And you can do the job given the chance, but you're not going to get the chance because you're acting, the guy's starting saying, this kid must be on something, and this guy must be doing something. I still think, though, that even employers that might be listening, they have to understand the value of making sure if there's somebody in their company that's got something going on, that they should get in this registry or some of the other things. But I'm talking about maybe giving us some examples of exactly how bad it is. We already know about the people that have died. Those are real bad. But what about people that really do get shortchanged for 20 or 30 years of their life because they can't perform?
It's absolutely tragic. I mean, Dr. Stern, who was one of our presenters, his background is in neurodegenerative disease, and he came at it from the angle of Alzheimer's. And when you get later in life, there can be a lot of similarity between CTE and Alzheimer's. So absolutely devastating effects. It's as if the person is no longer who they once were.
You know, Dr. Horvath, it's interesting that he should say that, because for years I've been on the Alzheimer's Association board here in Hawaii after losing both parents to the disease. And I think that's what brings a lot of us into some of the things we do. But what I think is very interesting here is that when I was a kid, the old folks in any family, well, they're getting a little touched in the head. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a cumulative thing, isn't it? If we can talk about traumatic injuries and dementia, and now look, you've got a person that really doesn't have a good quality of life, and maybe it could have been avoided.
Absolutely. Yeah. It could have definitely been avoided. And one of the fascinating things we learned was that, as Tony mentioned, even though a lot of those symptoms are the same, mm-hmm. It's fascinating. One of the things I learned was that it's very different the way it starts. The CTE kind of starts from the top of your head and goes in, whereas the Alzheimer's sort of starts at the base
Bottom
and goes up.
It's
awful
fascinating.
It's awful when they meet in the middle. But it's difficult to be distinguished between the two.
Yeah, and I know that we've been able to label lots of different sorts of dementia.
Yeah.
What about in the work that you do in the social work? Are we able to label certain problems that people are having based on the physicality of these concussions or substance abuse or some of the other things we talked about?
There's a fine chance that it could be misattributed to something else. Mm-hmm. Another thing I wanted to mention along this line is, we have so many people here in Hawaii who are homeless. Mm-hmm. There was a study done not too long ago that found that, this was in a different city, many of the people who were homeless in that particular city had a much higher incidence of having traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. Anthony, we have actually talked about this a little bit in the past, and that is that some of these people on the street are out there because something's happened to them that was tragic, that was illegal. I mean, we got people out there, like Dr. Horvath just said, that we might have think, well, all those, they're alcoholics all over there. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they've just been, they've had a few concussions and nobody's helped them.
Well, we know the persistence of mental illness for sure in homeless folks, but I think that's a great point by Dr. Horvath, because, we might assume when we're talking about these issues that, these are victims who they must have the support of their friends and family. But when the symptoms can manifest in such a way where you can be full of rage and it's as if you aren't who you used to be, the family might not even understand. They might think, this guy's on drugs.
Might not let you come back in the house.
So there's that support system might not always be there. And when you have this combination of those factors, it can have, whether it's death, homelessness, there's a whole list of different awful results.
Where, Dr. Horvath, does the money come to compile the statistics that we need? We know now that there's grants and there's things. Let me give you an example. Recently, we had a point-in-time survey among the homeless in Hawaii.
Yes.
And it was not done properly this past year. We know that there is, data we have a couple times a year. We sit around the beaches and we count whales, so we know how many whales are here. Let's talk about this database you're talking about, this registry, and how many more thousands of people may be affected by things if the business profession, medical profession realized how big the number was. We devote more time to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's starting to happen now. Mm-hmm. As Tony mentioned earlier, the important thing here is we're starting to talk about this. Here, amongst us sitting here and all your listeners, through the movie, through the Frontline special, through these football players coming forward. There was a gentleman today who passed away, and it turned out he had a professional football player who had a diagnosis of CTE. So it's starting to get more into the public awareness.
Yeah, and Anthony, one of the things that you guys look at nationwide is that almost everybody at the end of these responsibility trails is got loaded up with money, with attorneys, with ways to buffer and shift and slide. Let's talk about how eventually people in your profession are going to be able to say, you know what, I've got some data that was compiled in Hawaii of 6,000 people with this kind of thing, and this is where this guy is.
Well, like Dr. Horvath said, we do have a lot to learn, but we do have a lot of great leads to follow up on, things that we, not that we have confirmation bias, but indications of where things might go. And these are things that need to be further supported by science, further supported by research and different studies. And so as we continue advancing these, then in the context of litigation, the defendants will have a harder time denying those victims justice based on just misleading arguments.
So here's the task that we're going to put in front of you. First of all, those of you that are already checked out GallagherLaw.com, within a week or so, we'll have this program up there so that you can sort of listen to what we talked about today. And more importantly, and I think there's subtle ways we can drop the hint, and I would guess, Dr. Horvath, when you're working in the social side of life, when you can give somebody a resource and say, hey, look, why don't you go look at this movie? That might help you out. Why don't you go to this website? That might help you out. How valuable is that to a practitioner?
Tremendously valuable. And we also do information referrals too as part of this project. Interestingly, we've gone out and talked to some physicians and other medical professionals, and they're very interested, but we've had one referral in the registry from a physician.
Yeah, see, that's tragic. I mean, I think that, and this happens in other parts of medicine. I talk a lot with Dr. Bob Kistner. We do a show called Healthy Veins, Healthy Legs, and 90% of the patients referred to a vascular surgeon come from their GP or from their primary care, who looks at them and says, "Oh, you got to go see the specialist." But here's a gray area, right? Because when somebody's in your office because they've committed a crime, or they're in an ER because they fell off the back of a bus, nobody really relates to, okay, let's look at what else could have contributed to this day. So talk about this registry again. What is its mission?
The mission is, there are several things. The first and foremost is to get as much information on Hawaii residents with neurotrauma injuries as possible. Voluntary registry, fill out the survey.
Confidential,
absolutely. Also, we educate the public on preventing these neurotrauma injuries and identifying them and taking care of yourself, and then also providing the free information referral to anyone with one of these injuries, regardless of whether they decide to be in the registry or not.
Yeah, I'm thinking that I 100% get that, and that's why I think this audience would be a prima facie way to start. I mean, this would be a really good, I think, even though somebody doesn't know, they might have a kid, or they might have a brother or a sister or an auntie that has a kid that's a little bit strange, and they say, I heard on the radio that this may not be, you just might not have a cranky kid. You might have a kid with a problem that is being masked in some way.
Yeah, and if they call our hotline, we can set them up, point them in several directions for where they could possibly get some services that they can check out and see, and perhaps get some assistance with all kinds of things related to these neurotrauma injuries.
Okay, earlier in the program, I tasked everybody with going to get a pen or a pencil.
You did.
Now, you've mentioned website and you mentioned phone number before. Okay, outside of the fact that you could record this on your smart device, write this down. The hotline, if you want to get on to Dr. Horvath, the hotline is?
Here in Hawaii, it's 808-692-1375.
Okay.
We also have a toll-free number for Neighbor Island folks, 1-866-447-9023. And the survey is on our website at www.hntrsurvey.com.
I'm so glad that is, doable.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes these things that you give out. And the good news is, of course, at Gallagher Law, there's going to be a link to this really, really soon. I think maybe we've taken, I think today, thanks to Dr. Horvath, Tony, a not a baby step, but a pretty giant step in letting people know that, look, there's a lot of stuff out there that you guys got to know about. And more importantly, this registry is not nice to have. You got to have it. You need it.
Yeah, you can't wait until the latency period runs its course and you're suffering devastating impacts. If you fit into the criteria, maybe Dr. Horvath can speak a little more specifically into who, if you're out there, what you might have experienced.
Let's do that. Let's do that, because, right now everybody knows there's this big study about dengue and Zika and everything else because it's scaring us all to death. But we have far more people in society right now listening to this show that have their heads damaged way more than the dengue or the Zika is going to do it.
Absolutely. We don't even know the numbers on some of them because a lot of it goes unreported. Think about how many people might have had a concussion or these sub-concussive blows that they have absolutely no idea that they have had. So we're really unsure on the numbers. So again, it's any resident of Hawaii who's had a traumatic brain injury, stroke, or spinal cord injury, wherever it occurred, whenever it occurred, can choose voluntarily to join this confidential study.
And thanks to technology, your information will not only be appreciated, but it'll go into the database and be able to be used right away. This has been one of our more informative programs on this subject, Dr. Horvath. I hope you can come back again another time and join us. And Anthony, always nice to see you. And please let Gary know that we so appreciate this platform to get this information out. I think it's great.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, now, if you want to know more about what we did today, or more importantly, what we're doing tomorrow, you get on and you go to Galiher Law, that's Galiher Law.com. And remember, these things, first of all, this www.hntrsurvey.com. It's a baby step. And if you take that step, you'll see it can be done very, very painlessly. And more important, it might take a loved one for you down the road and give them a lot less pain. We hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next time. In the meantime, if you want to know more about what we do at Galiher Law, just get online. It's easy. GaliherLaw.com. See ya.
Well, that's our program for today, and we certainly hope you'll come back next week for our next episode. In the meanwhile, to learn more about Team Galiher, log on to GaliherLaw.com. That's GALIHER Law.com.